Amora and Adana were twins, so alike that their own mother often mixed them up. They shared the same face, the same soft brown eyes, the same curve of a smile. But inside, they were as different as day and night. Amora was gentle and quiet. She found peace in simple things, like helping her mother in the garden or weaving baskets by the river. She was the one who always listened, always offered a comforting hand. Adana was wild and burning. She craved more than their small village could offer. Her eyes constantly looked beyond the hills, dreaming of grand houses, fine clothes, and a life of power. She was impatient, ambitious, and always wanted to be first, to be seen. Despite their differences, they were inseparable. People in the village often said the gods had molded them from the same clay, breathing life into them with a single breath. They were a pair, a unit. What one lacked, the other seemed to possess. Their bond was like a strong river, flowing steadily, never breaking. Until he arrived. His name was Chaka. He was a man of wealth, who had lived in faraway lands. Now, he had come back to their quiet village, not just to settle, but to find a wife. He was handsome, with eyes that held the wisdom of many journeys, and a smile that promised a good life. The village buzzed with talk of him. Every unmarried woman hoped to catch his eye. But Cheka saw only one. It was the village festival. Amora, dressed in a simple white cloth, stood near the musicians, her smile shy and genuine as she laughed at a story. She didn't try to draw attention. She simply was. And Chaka was smitten. He chose her. Not Adana, the twin who always sparkled, who always found a way to be noticed. He chose Amora, the quiet, gentle one. From the moment Cheka announced his wish to marry Amora, Adana's world turned cold and dark. She smiled when people congratulated her sister, but inside, a fire of jealousy roared. Why her? She screamed in her own mind. Why not me? We are the same, born of the same womb, bearing the same face. Why should I be left behind while she becomes a queen? The days leading up to the wedding felt like a sharp knife digging deeper into Adana's soul. The entire village was alive with excitement. Chika spared no expense. Amora's bridal gown arrived, a breathtaking masterpiece brought all the way from Italy, shimmering with soft pearls and delicate lace. He truly was in love. But Adana was consumed by a bitter pain. Each stitch on that dress, each joyful laugh from Amora, felt like a personal insult. The night before the wedding, tradition held that the twins would stay in their shared room, talking, sharing their last moments as unmarried women. Amora, glowing with pure happiness, spoke of her dreams. She spoke of the children she hoped to bear, of traveling to far-off cities with Cheka, and how she would always make sure Adana came along whenever possible. You will always be a part of me, Amora whispered, her hand gently touching Adana's. My other half. My best friend. Adana smiled. It was a perfect, innocent smile. But behind it, a poisonous seed had fully blossomed. Later that night, as Amora finally drifted into a peaceful sleep, her dreams surely filled with joy and hope for tomorrow. Adana acted. No one truly knew what happened in that room. The details were lost in the shadows, locked away with Adana's dark heart. Only the result was clear. The morning of the wedding was meant to be filled with song and celebration. Instead, the village was shaken by a horrifying discovery. Amora was found dead. She lay on the floor of the room she shared with Adana, her face serene, as if she was simply asleep, dreaming of her wedding day. But she wasn't breathing. Her heart was still. A wave of shock and grief swept through the land. The joy of the pending wedding turned to a cold, heavy sorrow. How could this be? On the very eve of her marriage. But something strange, something unsettling, happened next. Amidst the wails of grief and the villagers' tears, Adana stood up. Her eyes were red, but there was a strange, determined light in them. She insisted on proceeding with the wedding. My sister, she claimed, her voice soft but firm, came to me in a dream. She whispered that the family should not be shamed. She begged me not to let the wedding be cancelled, not to let Chika be broken. The village elders hesitated. This was unheard of. A funeral, yes. A wedding. But Chika, broken by fresh grief and confused by the striking resemblance between the sisters, was vulnerable. His mind was a storm of sorrow. He looked at Adana, her face a mirror of the woman he loved, and a desperate, illogical hope flickered within him. He agreed. And so, the wedding went on. It was silent. Eerie. No joyful songs. No drums beating. Just a heavy quiet, broken only by the whispers of confused villagers. Adana wore the magnificent gown meant for her sister. She walked to the altar, her face hidden behind the intricate veil, her smile a secret beneath the lace. She took her place beside a grieving Cheka. And so began a life built on blood, a throne carved from a sister's grave. Years passed. Adana played her role perfectly. She was a dutiful wife, a gracious hostess, and she managed Cheka's large home with skill. She bore Cheka's affections, smiled at his compliments, and wore Amora's identity like a queen wears her crown. But peace is never truly promised to the wicked. At first, it was subtle. A shadow moving in her peripheral vision. A whisper on the wind that sounded like Amora's voice. The scent of the jasmine Amora loved, even when no jasmine was in bloom. Adana dismissed them as tricks of her mind, a result of the trauma. Then came the dreams. Vivid, terrifying dreams. She would see Amora, not as she was found, serene and still, but as she was in her final moments. Adana would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs, the unspoken screams of her sister echoing in her ears. She grew restless. She found it hard to be alone. The vast halls of Cheka's house, once a symbol of her victory, now felt like a cage, haunted by unseen eyes. She tried to fill her days with tasks, with managing the servants, with grand parties. But the emptiness inside her grew, and the whispers, real or imagined, intensified. Cheka noticed her unease. He put it down to the lingering grief for her sister, or perhaps the pressures of managing his household. He tried to comfort her, but his touch, once a comfort, now felt like a brand, reminding her of the lie she lived. 3 years into the marriage, Adana became pregnant. For a time, the house was filled with a fragile joy. Cheka was ecstatic. He doted on her, lavishing gifts and attention. Preparations were made for the child's arrival, little clothes sewn, a beautiful crib carved from dark wood. Adana, too, felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps a child, a new life, would cleanse her, would push away the shadows. But then came the labor. It began normally enough. A few sharp pains, a rush of water. The midwives were called. But the pains did not grow stronger, they did not lead to birth. Instead, the labor dragged on, unnaturally. 1 day turned into 2. Then 3. The midwives, their faces creased with worry, tried everything they knew. Herbs, chants, massages. Nothing worked. Adana's screams began to echo through the grand house, not just from the pain of childbirth, but from a deeper, unseen torment. Her body grew swollen, distended. Her face became drawn and pale. Cheka paced outside the room, his heart filled with a terrible fear. The midwives grew silent, exchanging worried glances. This was not natural. 7 days. No child. Then 10. Adana was barely conscious between her agonizing contractions. Her whispers became delirious, broken by gasps of pain. By the 12th day, her body was a grotesque parody of life, racked with unimaginable pain. Her eyes, sunken and hollow, darted around the room, seeing things no one else could. She was begging for release, not just from the physical agony, but from the relentless grip of her guilt. She confessed. Not to Cheka, not to the midwives, but to the empty air, to the shadows that danced in the corners of the room. "Forgive me, Amora," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper between screams. "I did it. I killed you. I wore your dress. I took your life. I wanted to be you. I wanted it all." Her words were disjointed, broken by fresh waves of torment. The midwives looked at each other, confused, shaking their heads. They thought it was the fever, the delirium of prolonged labor. But the cold dread that filled the room was real. On the 14th day, Adana died. Her eyes were wide open, staring fixedly at something beyond the walls of the room, a silent terror frozen on her face. Her body was still swollen, a terrible secret within her. No child was born. No cry was heard. The grand house, once filled with the promise of life, fell silent again. The village whispered of a curse, of a sister's vengeance, of a fate worse than death. They said Amora had finally claimed what was hers, from beyond the grave. The shadow of the bride, indeed, had taken its toll.